You wake up and the darkness is total. A moment ago, or an hour or three, there was firelight. You felt it on your face even while you slept. The warmth, the faint orange behind your eyelids. Now there is nothing. You reach out. The embers are cold. Not fading, cold. It is the middle of the night. It is 40,000 years ago. There are no streetlights, no device glowing on the floor, no ambient hum of anything. The dark is the kind that has no bottom. And then, from somewhere just outside camp, close enough to hear clearly, something moves. Fire was not a luxury. For early humans, fire was heat in a world that could freeze you before morning. It was light in a darkness that predators navigated better than you could. The smell of smoke alone kept wolves and larger animals at a distance. The sound of it, the pop and movement, signaled something dangerous and alive to anything circling the edges of camp. Fire was also cooked food, and cooked food matters more than it sounds. Cooking softened tough meat and plant material, making it faster to digest and releasing more energy per meal. Some researchers have argued that the controlled use of fire for cooking is part of what allowed early humans to spend less time chewing and more time doing everything else. But beyond the practical, fire was something harder to name. It was where the group came back together at the end of a day, where decisions got made, where the sick were kept warm, the young were kept close, and the night was held at arm's length. When the fire burned, the camp had a center. When it went out in the dark, that center disappeared. But the real danger wasn't that the fire went out. It was that starting it again was not guaranteed. We take ignition entirely for granted. Making fire from scratch, without matches, without a lighter, without any manufactured tool, requires dry tinder you have stored and prepared, a friction or percussion method you have practiced enough to use under pressure, and conditions that cooperate. No wind strong enough to scatter sparks, no moisture in the air or the material, no hands shaking from cold. On a calm, dry night, with skill and the right materials, it could be done. Archaeological evidence suggests many groups used bow drills, a method that generates heat through sustained friction to ignite a nest of prepared tinder. Others used percussion, striking flint against iron pyrite to throw sparks into something that would catch. But skill degrades under cold. Tinder stored through rain is useless. Wet wood will not catch. And the person in the group most practiced at starting fire, the one who did it reliably every time, was not always the one who woke up first. In winter, in heavy rain, in wind, at 3 a.m, the fire that went out was not always the fire that came back. Evidence from archaeology and the anthropological study of forager societies suggests that many groups took this problem seriously enough to prevent it in the first place. Someone watched the fire. Not every group, not every night, but the role of fire tender appears often enough across documented hunter-gatherer cultures that researchers consider it likely a widespread practice. Keeping embers alive through dark hours required attention, fuel, and someone willing to stay half awake when everyone else had let go. Some groups may have carried live coals when moving camp. Ethnographic records describe forager societies transporting embers wrapped in bark or insulating material. Slow, careful work that treated fire as something too valuable to rebuild from scratch at a new site. And fire appears to have moved between groups as well. The distribution of fire-starting tools and materials across ancient campsites suggests that fire, or the means to make it, was sometimes shared, traded, or passed along. That a group that had lost their fire might receive embers from a neighboring band, which means that fire, even then, was something worth having a relationship over. And this is where fire stops being technology and becomes power. In groups where firemaking required real skill, the person who held that skill held something more than warmth. They held safety. They held the cooked meal. They held the one thing that made the dark survivable. Anthropological studies of societies where firemaking remains a specialized skill consistently show that skilled firemakers carry elevated status, not by rule, but by dependency. When the cold comes and the sounds begin at the edges of camp, the person who can bring fire back is not simply useful. They are necessary in a way that supersedes almost everything else. This may be one of the earliest forms of social authority not tied to physical size. A smaller, older person who could reliably start fire in damp conditions may have commanded more deference than a stronger person who could not. The ember kept alive through the night was also a kind of signal that someone was paying attention, that someone could be trusted when everyone else was asleep. The firekeeper was, in a real sense, the person who held the group together in the dark. But sometimes the fire did not come back. For a small group in cold conditions, no dry tinder, no one skilled enough to raise sparks under pressure, wet wood, strong wind, a lost fire was not an inconvenience. In parts of Europe 40,000 years ago, temperatures dropped sharply after dark. Without heat, hypothermia could begin in hours. Children and older members of the group were most vulnerable. Without light, the defensive edge of camp dissolved. Predators that had held back from the firelight moved closer. Without cooking, stored food presented different problems. The group without fire was the group that suddenly had to find fire, or build it, or get through the night without it. In some conditions, on some nights, that was a real emergency. Most people alive today have never experienced genuine darkness, never sat outside with no light source at all, in cold air, in silence, with sounds they could not identify. But a deep unease with exactly that situation is remarkably common. The discomfort of a power outage that stretches too long. The instinct to light something, a candle, a phone screen, even when you do not need to see anything. The particular unease of waking in the dark and not knowing where you are for a few seconds. These are not irrational responses. They are inherited ones. For almost all of the time humans have existed on this planet, darkness without fire was a condition worth being genuinely afraid of. That fear was functional. It kept people awake. It kept the embers fed. It kept the group alive through nights that had real danger in them. You carry that reflex without having earned it through experience, without needing it tonight. But it is still there, running quietly, doing its old job. The next time you reach for a light switch without thinking, consider what that gesture replaced. 40,000 years of someone staying awake in the cold and the dark, feeding the embers, watching the edge of camp, making sure the fire did not go out, so that you could sleep.